Welcome to Grubstakers, the podcast about billionaires. This week we're talking about the Carlyle Group. Specifically, its three co-founders, David Rubenstein, William Conway, and Danielle D'Aniello. We're going to talk about their involvement in the defense industry, their coincidence connections to the September 11th attacks, and their major bankrolling of U.S. war on terror and foreign policy. Find out more about this bloodthirsty private equity group today on Grubstakers.
I think we disproportionately stop whites too much.
I taught those kids lessons on product development and marketing, and they taught me what it was like growing up feeling targeted for your race.
I am proud to be gay. I am proud to be a Republican.
You know, I went to a tough school in Queens, and they used to beat up the little Jewish boys.
You know, I love having the support of real billionaires.
5, 4, 3, 2.
Sock it to me.
Hey, welcome back to Grubstakers. Sean P. McCarthy here, as always, joined by
Andy Palmer,
Yogi Polywall,
Steve Jeffries.
And we got an exciting two-parter for you this week.
Deuces.
And next week. And we're going to talk today.
Dos-parter.
Today we're going to talk about the Carlyle Group. And the Carlyle Group is one of, if not the largest private equity firms in the world. And it's very interesting in that, unlike most private equity firms that are based in New York City, Carlyle Group is based in Washington, D.C. And the reason for that is
Sean has a petty internet grudge with a guy on Twitter who's really annoying, and Sean found out that his dad works for the Carlyle Group, so he was like, "Oh shit, we got to take this guy down," which was almost literally what he texted me.
No, don't cheapen my desire to talk about issues of war and peace and government corruption and all these things.
His name is Connor Arpwell. Look him up.
Sean went deep state and then didn't even consult us and said we're doing the Carlyle Group.
We're not. We don't even usually meet on this
This is a
day.
democratic institution.
Look, if you're implying that this podcast is somehow about my petty Twitter beefs, I'll have you know.
No, I'm stating it outright.
Yeah, we're not implying anything.
Yeah.
We're literally calling you out.
Well, here's what I'll say about this, and I don't want to belabor it for those not interested in Democratic Socialists of America Twitter drama.
Sean, none of us are interested in this. You brought it up on purpose.
Except for me, because I'm attached to shitty internet people.
Yeah.
So Sean was like, this guy Connor Arpwell's dad works for Carlyle Group, and I had to look up who the guy was.
Right.
And then I just got sucked into how shitty this guy is on Twitter.
Oh, great.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, look, the only thing that bothered me is that essentially everybody on Twitter, including Connor Arpwell, was saying, yes, my dad works in finance. That doesn't make me a bad person. And it's just, when you say that word finance, people are like, oh, it's George Meany. You're going to the Carlyle Group and you're getting a loan to start your small business. It's not like, oh, yeah, my dad, gave Muhammad Atta the training to fly the building into the South Tower, which is a more accurate description of what the Carlyle Group does. So, I mean, I wanted to do this episode, yes, partly out of pettiness, but also I wanted to kind of hopefully explain a little bit more about the Carlyle Group and what people mean when they say, quote, finance.
And if you're wondering what Connor Arpwell's like that would trigger such a reaction, if this ever gets back to him, he's going to call Sean an ableist reactionary.
Well, he won't be wrong, but
I didn't know the Carlyle Group only taught people how to fly planes and not land them. I didn't know that's what they did.
They did provide training for the Saudi Arabian National Guard to control the populace, let's say.
SNG.
Listen,
Yes.
Lennon had a rich dad, and if you point out that someone else has a rich dad as an argument, then you are ableist against rich dad havers.
It is true. Vladimir Lenin also donated several $1,000s to Hillary Clinton's campaign against Bernie Sanders and sells buttons for $8 a pop.
$8 a pop.
Or is it $7?
What?
I don't know.
It's $3.50 for shipping, which was an unforeseen.
That's a strange amount for shipping.
And then
buttons?
$5 for $4 for a pair of buttons.
Oh.
Yeah.
Michael Arpey is a managing director at the Carlyle Group. He's been so since 2010, and he's Connor Arpwell's father. And another thing is, like, it's fine to have a rich dad, but maybe when the fact that you're kind of changing your name to hide the fact that you have a rich dad is a little suspicious. But I don't want to belabor the point. I just want to say a managing director at the Carlyle Group has an equity stake in the Carlyle Group. This is millions and millions of dollars net worth. It's how you're able to buy a $700,000 condo in Washington, D.C. And I've just been
being able to buy a $700,000 condo in Washington, D.C. is recognized under the DSM-5.
But my point was there was another kind of pushback on internet Twitter drama where they were like, well, a person's father doesn't matter for socialism. A person's father, it's not relevant for socialism.
That's what Jesus said.
But clearly, this is like a liberal bastardization of socialism, because on Grubstakers we practice Juche socialism, which means that Connor Arpwell must be punished for at least 3 generations for the crimes of his father. And the other point is just, if you're going to talk about privilege or whatever else, we
dance in large groups.
You do have to acknowledge wealth privilege, which is like, obviously if your father made a lot of money doing 9/11, then you're going to have certain material advantages, and it's kind of disingenuous to hide that in your advocacy. And maybe sit down and let the workers speak.
People called him a wrecker for some bullshit he pulled with Medicare for All campaign, and so he started selling buttons that said DSA wrecker. And I hope that after this, he starts selling buttons that say "My dad did 9/11."
He should sell buttons that say 9/11 phone call recipient. But yeah, I mean it's. I just wanted to kind of explore what the Carlyle Group actually does, and some of the things are pretty horrifying, especially in terms of destroying unions and benefits for a lot of workers in this country, which is what all private equity has been involved in. The Carlyle Group is kind of more a military-industrial complex version of it. And I just wanted to talk about that in particular, and it's totally unrelated to any Twitter drama or psychopathic urges that I might have to just constantly yell at people online.
Yes, all of this was true before Sean got those psychopathic urges.
I'm selling the buttons. You can buy my psychopathic urges buttons.
It's going to be on our Patreon.
But I guess let's just kind of move on to the Carlyle Group, unless there's anything else on DSA Twitter drama.
Whoa, Juche socialism? What is that?
Juche.
Oh, I thought we were sushi socialism.
It's the North Korean version of socialism, where it's
the
like
only true version of
socialism and the Kim family is God.
Oh.
Yeah.
Just the way Marx intended.
I mean, they taught Trump during his visit.
Yeah.
But so the Carlyle Group itself is, as we mentioned, a private equity firm, Washington, D.C. based, and it's heavily involved in defense. And there's a documentary, it's on YouTube, called The Iron Triangle. There's also a book called The Iron Triangle, and a journalist wrote about essentially the Iron Triangle being the Pentagon, Congress, and industry. And it's kind of at the confluence of the military-industrial complex, where the Carlyle Group has hired George Bush Sr., James Baker, and Baker.
They picked up George Bush, James Baker, Richard Darman is over there, who was a former budget director in the White House, Arthur Levitt, the former SEC chairman, William Kennard, the former FCC chairman.
But the point is, essentially, like Michael Lewis, the guy who wrote The Big Short, Michael Lewis, the guy who wrote The Big Short, called this access capitalism. That's his quote, where essentially the Carlyle Group has been big in getting particularly former Pentagon people to come into the fold after they leave government and then both lobby and advise as to how they should invest in defense. And also, as we mentioned, James Baker, George H.W. Bush, these people have been very influential in helping the Carlyle Group get involved in Saudi Arabia.
He also wrote Moneyball.
Yes.
Access Tonight is my favorite nightly program.
But I guess we should just kind of start with the early history of the Carlyle Group, and particularly we're going to focus on David Rubenstein, but there's also Danielle D'Aniello, and Greg, and
I don't have a clip for this one.
Andy, every time Sean stumbles, play the clip of names every time. Who the fuck are these people, Sean?
All right, so there's three particular.
George Bush.
All right. There's three particular people in the Carlyle Group. It's David Rubenstein, William Conway, and Daniel D'Aniello, or whatever, fucking some Guinea name. I don't know.
Is that the Catch Me Outside girl?
But the point is, these are the three primary co-founders of the Carlyle Group, along with a guy named Steve Norris, who left in '95. And these co-founders have each been valued by Forbes at about $3 billion net worth as of July 2018.
Wow.
And I guess we should probably just kind of talk about David Rubenstein to begin with.
Now, it all started when they realized that on-base percentages were more valuable than was previously assumed.
So David Rubenstein is born in 1949 in Baltimore, and he grows up in a modest home in Baltimore in the Jewish neighborhood. His dad was a mail sorter for the U.S. Post Office. His mom was a homemaker, and I did just like that Forbes gives David Rubenstein a self-made score of 9, of course, for 9/11. But so David Rubenstein, he grows up in Baltimore, and he was he was interested in politics in an early age. In '75, he graduates from Duke University and then the University of Chicago. He spends 2 years at a corporate law firm, but then he serves as a lawyer for Senator Birch Bayh, a Democrat from Indiana at the time. And then a year later, at the age of 26, this is from... All right. A year later, at the age of 26, Rubenstein joins the Carter he joins the Carter presidential campaign as a policy aide, and then he's subsequently hired as a deputy to President Carter's domestic policy advisor. And then, according to the New Yorker, he from 76 to 80, David Rubenstein helped Carter write memos, prepare for press conferences, and help draft the State of the Union address. People said that while he was working at the White House, he was very shy. He didn't really talk to a lot of people.
Oh.
Yeah. He said anybody...
He'd be a complete psycho. He's like, oh, he doesn't get to talk, though.
I've tried to get into every episode, by the way, if you've not noticed.
He was notorious for when people criticized his foreign policy interventions, like arming the Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. He called them ableist. So he was in the Carter White House from 70.
You know what not arming Al-Qaeda is? Reactionary.
So he's a quiet guy. Oh, and also in the White House, this is where he meets his wife, Alice Rogoff, who we can talk about in a minute here. But they would later go on to, they separated in they married
2017.
Yeah, they married in 1983.
Right.
I think they actually separated in 2005 and then officially got divorced in 2017.
Yeah, it's interesting because online, in some websites it says she's still his partner, even though they have now officially been divorced for over a year. But during that time that they were married, they lived apart from what she lived in Anchorage and he lived on the East Coast. And it's like, well, what type of marriage is that? What is this? Some Oleg Deripaska shit?
I read that she hosted Barack Obama for a dinner.
Yeah, she's friends with
Obama cuck David Rubenstein.
She's friends with the Obama family.
Now, David, some of your opposition to the carried interest loophole closing has upset me greatly. So I decided to assert my dominance over you.
Where is your God now?
She lives out in Anchorage, but she also flies Cessna, and she's crashed it more than once.
Yeah.
She crashed it recently in, she avoided a house and then hit a eagle nest tree and then crashed in the water and then left unscathed, which, by the way...
I will say in her defense, that's just kind of what you do with Cessnas. It's You fly a Cessna more than like 3 times, you're going to crash it.
She went to David Rubenstein's flight training school for the Cessna, so she only learned how to take off and not to land.
Yeah, right.
Like, I might have mentioned it already, but like, my grandpa died co-piloting a small plane, so I'm like, yeah, they crash. Everyone. That's just what happens.
Yeah.
This is like a Grubstakers official position.
Yeah.
You should never get in the Cessna.
Well, I mean, that said, it's like I one day want to get a pilot's license and fly Cessnas. But
so you guys will know when the final episode of Grubstakers is coming. As soon as Andy gets approved for his pilot's license.
We threw him a party when he gets his pilot license, but it's more of a going away party.
Hey, we're not actually getting in the plane with you.
Oh, yeah.
We'll see you off there.
I like the idea that she crashed into the eagle's nest tree because she was looking for the Black Eagle Trust Fund.
Well, that's one thing the article mentioned is that it is a federal crime to mess with the eagle property, but even in the article they're like, we think she'll get away with this.
Yeah,
this should be fine.
Wait, what's the eagle thing?
They know Bush Sr. Which one? The conspiracy theory or the actual eagles?
I don't. Whatever Yogi was just talking about.
Oh, she crashed her plane into like a habitat for eagles or something.
Oh, an eagle habitat.
An eagle nest tree is
nest
trees
tree,
that eagles nest in, and she crashed part of her plane into the tree, avoiding a house and then hit the water. And so, even if she wasn't avoiding a house, if she just happened to destroy an eagle nest tree, it is like a federal crime because they are endangered and also they are a national bird. Caw! And so. It is one of those things where you can't fuck with eagles.
So yes,
but they have a special exception. If you're driving a Cessna, it's bound to happen.
They have a special exception if you place the calls that made sure Bush Sr. was not at the Pentagon that day. In 1981, David Rubenstein takes this job with a mergers and acquisitions group.
Murders and acquisition?
Not quite yet. And I'm sorry, this is from a New Yorker profile. Most of my biography for David Rubenstein comes from a New Yorker profile. It'll be up on the Tumblr. So he takes this job at a mergers and acquisitions law firm in 1981. But he starts he feels like legal work bores him. He was apparently devastated when Reagan beat his boss, Carter, in 1980. But later he would go very close to the Bush family, and he jokes in some joint interview he did with George W. Bush and Bill Clinton that he actually almost helped George W. Bush become president because he fucked things up in the Carter administration.
Yeah.
So then Reagan won and George H.W. Bush became vice president, just like this kind of
Power's incestuous.
No nepotism here.
Yes. And so the quote he says about this mergers and acquisitions law firm is, quote, he says, "I realized I was going somewhere that wasn't going to take me where I want it to be," which would, of course, be Saudi Arabia to train the secret police. But so he gets into leveraged buyout. But the first thing he does is he meets this guy, Stephen L. Norris, who would be one of the co-founders of the Carlyle Group. And Stephen Norris is a lawyer at Marriott at the time. And in 1986, Stephen Norris, again from the New Yorker article, he learns of a change to federal tax code, which was initiated by Senator Ted Stevens, who was, of course, Alaska's senator, who said, internet's not a big truck, it's a series of tubes or whatever.
Right.
And he was also adorably corrupt, in addition to being meme-worthy. But Ted Stevens passed this thing.
The internet is not a big truck. It is a freezer full of $200,000 in cash.
Ted Stevens got something passed in the federal tax code, which allowed Alaska businesses to basically, in the 1984 tax bill, Alaska corporations could now sell their tax losses. So the way it worked, and this is from the taxcoach4u.com, quote, let's say you're a profitable corporation and you have like a $4 million tax bill on a $10 million profit. You can find like a needy Alaskan corporation with $10 million in losses, losses. So you pay that corporation however much it wants, say $2 million, for the right to take their tax loss on your own bottom line.
Really?
So then, even though you didn't actually incur any any loss that year, you take on their tax losses, and then you can completely write off your tax bill. And so this became known. This lasted from 84 to 88 or 87, and it was called the Great Eskimo Tax Scam. And it was not not to be confused with the Great Eskimo Scandal, where Congress people were caught having sex with the same interns. And I got to try them. And
you don't actually gotta.
Hold on.
Yes.
Remember when Andy would take 90 years to do drops? Remember that?
Hold on. Keep waiting.
You guys remember when Palmer?
But so...
Sorry, I'll have that queued up for next time.
We should probably just have it in the drops at this point. But so essentially where Stephen Norris and David Rubenstein first go into business is they help... Yeah, so they broker the transfer of about $1 billion in losses in a single year, earning them $10 million in fees. This is in 1986. So they set up a business that matches companies with native Alaskan businesses that would in turn, sell their losses to those companies so they could write off. And again, this is just kind of like ridiculous tax accounting scandal. That's how they made their first $10 million. Was they did this in 1986, but then in 1987 this loophole was closed. And so what happens is Stephen Norris and David Rubenstein are meeting at the Carlyle Hotel kind of regularly in Upper East Side, New York, and this is where the name Carlyle Group comes from, from the Carlyle Hotel. And as we mentioned, they want to, after this, tax scam gets closed down, they want to set up a private equity firm. But they have the idea that, a lot of people at the time didn't understand that they would set it up in Washington, D.C. Because as we mentioned, David Rubenstein did work in the Carter administration. He had a lot of Washington contacts because of that. And so they had the idea to, as we mentioned, access capitalism. And they would kind of come into defense later, but the entire idea with setting up the Carlyle Group in Washington, D.C. in 1987 was they would use contacts with government to utilize private equity techniques to make a shitload of money.
At the outset, we really didn't envision entirely where it might go. We saw it simply an opportunity to take advantage of Washington and the people here and the access that people had to transactions.
What's great about these drops is that Sean gave me a list of all these audio clips from the documentary, and they're all just saying what Sean just said, but better.
They don't stumble for 10 minutes before saying.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, that was Stephen Norris, who was, as we mentioned, a co-founder of the Carlyle Group. He left in 1995. I believe he's a multi-millionaire, but not actually a billionaire like the other two because he was bought out in 95 before the public IPO. But yes.
If you have more than $4 million, would that make you a multi-billion millionaire? Because a multimillionaire, that's probably 2 and up.
Right.
So multiples of 2, so that would be 4 would be the minimum for being a multi-billionaire.
This is the shit you think of when you're only in the single digits of billions.
But so yeah, as you heard Stephen Norris say in the clip, their entire idea was to make money doing what is essentially legalized bribery.
Right.
Let's be clear about, what the revolving door does. It's you're selling access and you're hiring people who have access, and because you understand where government procurement is going, you are insider trading on government procurement and government contracts and these kinds of things.
They saw a market and they decided to innovate.
But so it's really with this guy Frank Carlucci, who was Reagan's Secretary of Defense, I believe from 86 to 88, after the previous Secretary of Defense had to step down for the Iran-Contra scandal, where, they were selling coke on the domestic market to help fund their murderous right-wing insurgency in Nicaragua.
So they're like, let's find someone who's on the level.
Gotta find someone that's cool.
Frank Carlucci was setting up policies while he was in office as Secretary of Defense that he's now capitalizing on as chairman of Carlyle Group.
Right, and so the argument is that essentially while Frank Carlucci was Secretary of Defense, I believe, like I said, 86, 88, I believe, he set up a long-term procurement system for the Pentagon whereby various companies would have, long-term deals. And the argument has been made that Carlucci essentially knew what companies would be coming up on Pentagon contracts that weren't publicly available knowledge,
right?
Including BDM. And so BDM and later United Defense. And so, as we mentioned,
what's BDM?
It's like ropes and pulleys and shit. It's a lot of leather play.
They had the entire contract for the U.S. Army's BDSM operations.
They're like, we like bondage, we like domination. Not big on sadism, but big on masochism.
Yep. Oh yeah.
So it's a bunch of people who don't want to inflict anything on anyone else but themselves.
I mean, this is a multi-billion-dollar contract, and they had foreplay knowledge,
but no sadism.
But so, according to the New Yorker, BDM was Ford Aerospace's defense consultancy, and so it was through BDM that they purchased United Defense, I believe, as well as Venel, which we'll get to Venel in a second. But so they were able to
Big Dick Energy,
right? So. As we met, so in the early years, Carlyle Group struggled a little bit, but with Frank Carlucci coming on board, as soon as he left the Reagan admin in 1989, and then in 1992 he becomes a chairman, so he's like a big director of the strategy all the way up to the second Iraq War. But it's really in 1991 that Carlyle Group starts hitting the big time because, of course, of the Persian Gulf War. So as we mentioned, Carlucci comes in 89, and then at this point, because the Cold War is ending, a lot of defense firms are undervalued in these kinds of things, and so Carlucci advises them on which defense firms to buy up in their private equity group, including BDM. And then as soon as the 1991 Gulf War breaks out, all of these defense investments skyrocket. So the Gulf War is just amazingly good for the Carlyle Group for a variety of reasons. And particularly as well, it was because after the Gulf War, they were able to really get involved in Saudi Arabia, which would have consequential effects on Lower Manhattan in about 10 years.
What?
But that wheel was set in motion under Carter.
Yeah. Most likely.
What's that Italian dude's name? Carlucci?
Frank Carlucci,
It's
yes.
crazy how that last name, I'm sure there's plenty of people named Carlucci that are decent people, but it just screams corruption. Oh yeah, Carlucci bought homeless people turkeys. Yeah, to bolster good reputation for the crime he's committing, obviously, right?
But so Frank Carlucci gets them involved, heavily in defense, and this is mainly what Carlyle Group becomes. And so what happens in 91, of course, is the Persian Gulf War, and then after that, a lot of Kuwaiti and Saudi elites were very grateful for the United States military intervention that, of course, threw Saddam Hussein out of Kuwait, protected Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia was very worried that Saddam Hussein was going to invade them. We stopped all that. So what happens is now James Baker...
And all it took was carpet bombing.
Does the carpet bombing match the drapes?
You just
they unveiled their precision carpet bombing of Iraq.
It was very controversial when David Rubenstein called his book, You Don't Get to 3 billion without a highway of death or two. But so through James Baker III he was in government for a long time. He was George H.W. Bush's Secretary of State. He joins the Carlyle Group when he leaves office, and Clinton comes in, and so he
probably had a lot of experience that would help them out. There's nothing fishy about this.
Yes. So James Baker III, I don't know if we have the drop for him. Maybe not. But essentially, Stephen Norris talks about how James Baker III's job was to set up the meetings with Saudi elites. He is the guy who got them in the room with all these Saudi elites, including eventually the bin Laden family. The bin Laden family became significant investors in Carlyle Group until controversial events forced them to part ways. But so it is just kind of an interesting thing where they became the go-to Western private equity company involved in Saudi Arabia because they were hiring all these former U.S. officials to lobby for their behalf in Saudi Arabia. And then the other part of it is it kind of gets warped where, as we've mentioned, Saudi Arabia is one of, if not the biggest state sponsors of terrorism in the world. And yet, Carlyle Group has all these investments over there, and they have like all these government contracts, all these former officials working for them. So it's kind of an open question where maybe some of our kind of soft response to Saudi Arabia's funding of terrorism is related to the fact that if we were to, say, crack down on Saudi Arabia, Carlyle Group would be out a lot of money of their existing investments.
Right.
So they have an interest in keeping our relationship good with, again, a genocidal dictatorship terrorist state.
The bin Laden family...
No, that's not it.
But what a tease for later.
And this became a huge arena for corruption.
Oh, wait, that's Saudi bribes. Okay.
Oh, yes.
How did I miss this one?
Yeah. And the other thing that the Carlyle Group starts doing in Saudi Arabia is in order to bribe Saudi officials, they start setting up companies in Saudi Arabia, which they would in turn appoint some, influential Saudi, either a member of the royal family or just like a son of one of the elites. They would appoint them as the chairman of this company. Mm-hmm. So what happens is, Saudi Arabia...
I do have this one.
Because instead of just paying a bribe to somebody in the royal family, now you could set them up in business.
Right.
And you could say, well, this business is part of our offset commitment to you that goes with this arms sale. And so we're going to take, this son of this prince and create a little company for him that's going to be funded by Boeing. But all Boeing's doing is recycling the money out of the arms deal. So they get $9 billion, they kick some of it back. So Carlyle, I think, was brought in to try to put some legitimacy on this process.
Right. And so, yeah. So
I like Sean agreeing with the thing that he learned this from.
That's exactly right. Yes.
yes.
That was the documentary,
that
The
sounds
Iron
right.
Triangle.
I'd like to think that's how Sean treats his inner monologue as well. Yes, these are thoughts I'm thinking, yes.
So Carlyle Group is, of course, selling weapons to Saudi Arabia at this point after the Gulf War because, again, they're heavily involved in all these defense industries. And then they are kicking some of this back in the form of bribes, which are all illegal under the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. But, it doesn't stop you when you're this influential.
Right.
But it is interesting just like how deep the Carlyle Group Saudi Arabia connection goes and how it kind of has a negative effect on U.S. foreign policy because so many vested interests are at stake.
Well, it's a good thing that they're doing it so visibly because that means that they're going to get caught for all these bribes.
And
people go to jail.
People are going to go to jail. I mean, it's obviously we're not breaking the story. Everyone knows this information already, and that's why we're just shedding more light to a situation that's already well lit.
Well, the Foreign Corruption Act, it was made for a reason.
FCA.
And these guys are clearly in violation.
And girls.
Shout out to the ladies.
The other thing they do in Saudi Arabia is through BDM, they buy a company called Vanel.
Yeah, Daddy.
Through BDM, they buy Vanel, and as we mentioned, they later sell BDM for like a 650% profit in the 90s. But while they're running Vanel is doing this thing where they're training Saudi Arabia's National Guard. And of course, as we mentioned, Saudi Arabia is a repressive dictatorship that regularly beheads people for protesting and these kinds of things. So when you're actually providing the training for the National Guard, you are of course training a military force that is used to suppress domestic insurgency and domestic dissent.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe this is fucked up, but I didn't know they had a National Guard. Was this made by Vanel, or did they have their own group and then Vanel trained them?
It might have been set up in the 90s.
Because that's something that when McCarthy mentioned it, I was like, wait, I didn't know they had a National Guard. And then part of me is like, well, I don't even know what branches of authority that they do have. Not to say that they wouldn't or shouldn't, but I just don't know. That's great, because National Guard seems so I don't know, it just feels very American. Like, oh yeah, the National Guard. But then, of course, other countries have their own National Guard.
Yeah.
Yeah, you take 2 days every month. And you can you can go back to, not being able to do anything about the beheadings.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. 28 days a month. You don't know what to do. 2 days, you're the one chopping heads.
That's probably where, like, you know, some of the princes, like, they'll join the National Guard so they can get out of participating in the genocide in Yemen.
Take a day off.
Yeah.
I just like the idea of, like, 2 days a week you have to, like, go shoot at women drivers. No, I'm just
No,
kidding.
they made that legal now because the new prince is woke.
Ladies, start your engines. But so, and also Vanel, though. Vanel.
You have no idea how much power comes with a sad trombone.
So BDM is their real foray into the kind of defense industry in the 90s in particular. They get involved with Saudi Arabia. They're helping train the Saudi National Guard. But it is really the September 11th attacks that take Carlyle to the next level of profitability. And there's some very suspicious things that happened with the Carlyle Group on September 11th, the day of, because...
Most likely coincidences.
Yes. Pure triple parentheses coincidences.
Happenstance. You never know.
But so the annual investor meeting is held of the Carlyle Group is held on September 11th, 2001 at the Washington, D.C. Ritz-Carlton.
On September 11th, in somewhat of a horrible coincidence, the Carlyle Group was holding their annual investor meeting here in Washington, D.C. At the Ritz-Carlton Hotel. George Bush Sr. was at the meeting. The Carlyle Group said that he left the night before September 11th and was on his way to some location in the Midwest.
It's interesting, to say the least, because as we mentioned, you know, bin Laden's estranged, allegedly, half-brother was there at this investment meeting, as well as...
And I talked to someone who was at the meeting, and they told me that the whole crew of Carlyle, including Frank Carlucci, and James Baker, and David Rubenstein, along with Shafiq bin Laden, who was a representative of the bin Laden family and their fortunes, were all in the same room together watching the events of September 11th take place.
Right. And so it's just one of those things that's a little strange because September 11th was extremely profitable for the Carlyle Group. So it's like, you know... this is not a Tower 7 podcast yet. But the more research we do...
What's that dude's name? Sariq Safif? What's his name? The bin Laden brother that's in this room during this?
I'm going to say Sariq.
Sariq?
I know I just listened
Man,
to this. But
what was going through Sariq's head? I bet he was... I guarantee he was thinking, this is the safest room to be in right now.
I'm a Building 3 truther.
What?
That one wasn't hit by an airplane, but it was still destroyed. That's like the Hilton, I think.
Oh, yeah, we talked about that.
Really, that happened?
Well, I mean, there was just a bunch of little buildings underneath the towers that were crushed.
Oh.
But it was not, they were not hit by planes. How did they collapse?
All I know, man, is if you fold the $20 bill, you can see the Twin Towers, and then you fold it the other way, and you see it burning, you fold it the other way, it's the Pentagon, man. It's in our money, man. The capitalism is corruption. The killing of brown people is funded by the Carlyle Group.
Just to fuck with us, the Carlyle Group hired a former Treasury Secretary and had him do the 9/11 design on the on the U.S. currency before they carried out the attacks.
Hey, trust us. It's going to be super cool. I don't get it. The building's on fire? Trust me.
But it is like, you know, I mean, I guess when you look at like any
if you
sort
type
of...
September 11th into Wingdings, it's got 2 airplanes, 2 towers, and then it says Carlyle Group, and then it shows the Star of David. Coincidence? Sean showed me this.
Sean got it tattooed on his back.
It's right underneath the Iron Cross tattoo and the Heritage Not Hate tattoo. But so it is like one of those things where you look at, you know, any sort of event or conspiracy theory or whatever, people ask the question, who benefits? Well, If you're looking at 9/11, who benefits is the Carlyle Group. And another thing we didn't mention yet, but so Frank Carlucci, again, Reagan's defense secretary, and the guy who really made the Carlyle Group. He's since died, but he was, a multimillionaire in his time. Frank Carlucci was a member of the Project for a New American Century, which you might be familiar with as a neoconservative think tank, which was putting out these policy papers advocating for essentially imposing democracy through military force, invading Iraq, invading Iran, setting up functional democracies there to stabilize the region. And so it just happens, this guy is, while he's there, he's also a chairman of the Carlyle Group, which has all these defense industry holdings, and would, of course, and did, of course, benefit tremendously from massive military action. So it's hard to tell where their actual genuine ideology and the profit motive begin and end for these kinds of calculations, but it's just pretty horrifying to think about. Oh, and we mentioned, George H.W. Bush was there. George H.W. Bush was employed by the Carlyle Group for the longest time. He was their official female greeter. All right, I don't know.
Oh, because he's groping women.
Yes.
That's what you're saying.
Yeah. So
is that a thing? George H. Gropes?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, he's a big groper.
Yeah, what? George H.W. got me too.
Yeah.
I like that it's like, when you're like on the brink of death and you're trying to like resuscitate your reputation from Iran-Contra, and you're just like, well, I should squeeze the asses of every woman who takes a picture with me.
After Barbara Bush died, I said that George H.W. Bush was probably doing a lot of grief groping to get through it.
But so, yes, George H.W. Bush was hired.
He's a monster. But
well, no, he's a valued Carlyle Group employee, Andy.
I think the lesson we're taking away from this is when people say Bush did 9/11, the one that they're thinking of didn't do it. However,
he left the meeting in the morning because he had to grope someone in the Midwest. I've got to be there at 9 o'clock to grope this woman. So George H.W. Bush, as we mentioned, his Secretary of State, James Baker III, comes on after the Bush administration. He comes on to the Carlyle Group in 1993. George H.W. Bush joins the Carlyle Group in 1998. And so primarily what he's doing is fundraising for them. He's going to Kuwait and Saudi Arabia to get, again, the elites of Kuwait and Saudi Arabia to invest with the Carlyle Group, to, buy defense contracts from their companies, these kinds of things. But he's also, giving speeches on behalf...
Hey, you ever want to get on the ground floor of a 9/11?
He's also giving speeches on behalf of the Carlyle Group, which allegedly he was paid about $100,000 a speech for. And then another interesting thing about George H.W. Bush's involvement is that he helps the Carlyle Group get set up in South Korea. Again,
George Bush Sr. is a fundraiser. He is the kind of guy who can go into Kuwait or Saudi Arabia, where they love him, pack the house, and get these guys to open up their wallets and give money to the Carlyle Group. That's his role. But if you look in over the history of this company, George Bush Sr. has clearly met with business leaders one-on-one, met with political leaders in South Korea and in Saudi Arabia, and that would lead one to believe that he's doing much, much more than just giving speeches for the Carlyle Group.
Yeah, it's the best part about this documentary is they like green screen these people to be like talking with like sinister looking conferences in the background.
What, really?
But then when they get to the 9/11 part, they're just talking with 9/11 in the background.
God.
So you could see like the building smoking and like people jumping out as they're like, well, it is just kind of a funny coincidence.
It's like the idea that like George H.W. Bush gets a lot of money for just like when he does those speeches and packs the house, he always peppers in, "It's great to be here in," and then just like city name.
He does like applause lines.
Yeah. That's how he gets the big bucks.
I like to think while 9/11's happening in that room, everyone's just saying coincidence, just like they're just repeating it to one another. No real conversations happening. It's just a lot of coincidence, good to see a coincidence.
Another funny thing is when David Rubenstein, for his show, he has a show on Bloomberg Television, believe it or not, but he interviews various billionaires and influential people, and he did a joint interview with both George H.W. Bush and Bill Clinton. And at one point in the interview, Bill Clinton brings up 9/11, and you can clearly see David Rubenstein motioning to him to shut it up. No, they're going to... No more questions.
It's very minor, but the graphic on that Rubenstein show,
yes,
they stole from Larry King, and I'm mad about it. The original Jew interviewer.
He was like, ever since Larry King didn't get the phone call on the morning of 9/11, they've had a beef. But so, as we mentioned, the Carlyle Group, regardless of how truther you are, benefited enormously from 9/11. And Dan Brody is a journalist. He wrote the book The Iron Triangle about the Carlyle Group, and also helped do the documentary The Iron Triangle, which you've been listening to some clips from. So Dan Brody said this in an interview.
Did he play the sitar?
Yes.
This one's called the Evil Doing Chord.
It's interesting that he criticizes the backdealing and corruption of the Carlyle Group without disclosing that his brother-in-law played sitar for his documentary. So Dan Brody says that one of the Carlyle Group's companies scored the contract to clean up the Senate building after the anthrax scare. If you remember, anthrax was like the big scare issue right after 9/11.
The band, right?
Right. They thought there were all these anthrax, people getting mailed anthrax. And
I'm glad they got to the bottom of
that. But yeah, so the Carlyle Group, according to Dan Brody, has investments, in aerospace, defense, obviously, and biological cleanup. And they also have a lot of companies, or have several companies that do security background checks for, government employees and airline employees and
Flight
stuff.
training.
Yeah. And all of these things, skyrocketed after 9/11. So this was hugely financially beneficial. And so, of course,
Wow, they own all that shit, basically. If there's terror in the world, the Carlyle Group gets a cut of it?
Yeah. I mean, it's, as we mentioned, they profited hugely off the Gulf War, and then they started advocating for military buildup and a much more aggressive foreign policy.
Wait, let's go back to anthrax. What if they did it like, kind of a mob scheme where they're like, all right, we get this biological cleanup crew. Then I know this guy. He's got some anthrax. He'll send it to a couple Congress people. They'll need some. Guess what? Who needs biological cleanup now?
Right. I mean, like, the person that says, hey, this is anthrax could be one of their guys. It doesn't even have to be real anthrax. That's the thing. The cleanup's going to cost money if it's real anthrax. Yeah. So we might as well fake that part, too.
It's a nice Capitol building you got here. Be a shame if somebody put powdery substance all over it.
Someone vomited down the hall. Instead of Ajax, we use anthrax.
But so...
also, during that investigation, I think they mislabeled the person who did it, and then he killed himself.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Or the guy who did it killed himself. It's
either way, a dude's dead because of somebody wanting to make money off anthrax. The band.
He mysteriously killed himself the day before he was supposed to testify about Tower 7. But so part of this 9/11 boom is a company called United Defense, which
Can we not call it the 9/11 boom? Can we? I think that's there was no explosives, so let's not muddle the two.
Yeah.
So I mean, he said United.
Carlyle.
That is what United did on 9/11.
The Carlyle Group bought United Defense in 1997, and United Defense, one of their signature missile programs that they were trying to sell to the Pentagon, was something called the Crusader missile. And so in 1998, a congressional panel trashed the Crusader missile and said it was like basically useless for the type of modern U.S. warfare. It wasn't.
Members of the Pentagon had come and testified on Capitol Hill and said, no. We don't want the Crusader because it doesn't fit in with our priorities.
That was Congresswoman Cynthia McKinney, who actually, she talks about in the Iron Triangle how Carlyle Group, so she was one of the Congress people who brought attention to this Crusader missile system and ultimately got it shut down.
Nice.
May she rest in peace.
Yes. She was the subject of a 2002 primary challenge in which Carlyle, or one of their shadowy affiliates, got another black woman to run as a a former Republican to run as a Democrat, and then got mailed a bunch of Republicans in her Georgia district to vote in the Democratic open primary for her opponent. So they actually got her defeated in 2002, though she was later able to return in 2004. But it is just like an interesting thing where, because she was like raising all this noise about Carlyle Group.
Yeah, they cut her down.
Yeah. So, so yes, the story of the Crusader missile, to put it quickly, is that again, it was this like useless missile that it was trashed by.
This is a two-parter. Draw it out.
Yeah, that was trashed by a congressional panel in 1998. But after 9/11, Bush's fiscal year defense budget for 2002. Is a multi-billion-dollar increase, and it earmarks $476 million for the Crusader missile. And of course,
so then I started doing my research, and I learned that was the Crusader missile was manufactured by United Defense Industries, and that company was owned by the Carlyle Group, and that the president's father was on the payroll of the Carlyle
Group.
I don't think she said enough in that, so I kind of like my description more. But so yes,
two joke and then a real one.
God damn it! Now I can't stop. But so the point is, they set up this thing with the Crusader missile. To get it funded after 9/11, when this massive boom in defense spending is happening, and they're like, "Oh, how do we get ourselves cut into this?"
Right.
So they set up the funding for the Crusader missile, and then there's
How do you get a missile whose name is a historical analogy,
right,
for what we're doing in the Middle East?
Yeah, they really didn't really think of the optics of dropping Crusaders on the majority Muslim country of Iraq.
That's the thing. Like, they're so for how ridiculous truthers and conspiracy theorists are, this company is so slumpy in making it seem like they're not horrible people.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think most of it is just under the radar of general public knowledge.
I think they're trying to get so much done that it's hard to keep covers on all of it.
Oh yeah.
There's no way. So you have to let some of the conspiracy theories fester.
Right.
So it all seems ridiculous.
Right. And yeah, I mean, it's interesting. What
if they funded Loose Change to throw people off the trail?
They're like, the Black Eagle Trust Fund, definitely not the Carlyle Group, heavily profited from this event. But yeah, so I mean, and we were talking at the start, people call the Carlyle Group finance, and it's like, most people hear that word and they think banking. Well, it's like, this is not what the Carlyle Group does. This is blood money and profiteering and warmongering, where the entire argument of the military-industrial complex is that...
And if I've been listening to Sean at all, and that's questionable, they're mostly a 9/11 manufacturing company.
But yeah, the whole...
Rubenstein Airfields.
The whole idea of the military-industrial complex, or the whole fear that, Eisenhower and others have had, is that we might get...
Pilot lessons half off.
That we might get to a... They did a... The Carlyle Group did like a classic private equity takeover of the flight school, where they eliminated all the unions and they cut the benefits and the pensions.
They only taught half the class. I can just picture in August of 2001, it's the graduation.
Yeah.
And the flight school teacher is this Midwest guy, and he's like, "Now, where is he? Muhammad, get up here." Now, this young man is the heart and soul of this team.
But so, yeah.
He had a real attaboy attitude.
But the fear with the military-industrial complex is that we might get to a point where these private companies who make so much money from war start actually lobbying to increase the chances of war.
Might.
We're going to... We might get to that.
But it's, you look at...
It's a fear of a hypothetical that hasn't happened yet.
You look at our current war on terror rhetoric, and it's like, well, how did David Rubenstein get to $3 billion? I mean, it's directly linked into the current rhetoric and attitude we have towards war, where we are just in a constant state of war ever since 9/11.
Guys, we're breaking new ground here. I don't know if you were aware that America is constantly at war, and there are people who stand to profit from it.
Theoretically, Andy. We're not accusing anyone of anything.
Hypothetically,
Science
that
fiction
might happen in the United States.
Perhaps, if it's still called that then. That's how far in the future this may occur.
Hypothetically, do you think any of those people who stand to profit from it are members of the Washington, D.C. DSA?
And if any of these jokes don't land, that's our intention.
when we
only learned how to make our jokes take off.
There you go. I was going to do it. But so... just to wrap up the Crusader missile story, there was pushback from Cynthia McKinney and others in Congress.
Listen, some people can't land planes, and making fun of them for that is ableist.
It's like the Disability Caucus for Al Qaeda is like you have to make the attacks inclusive of all people's abilities. So we're gonna cancel 9/11 because not everybody can participate.
Guys, we got to cancel 9/11.
Oh god,
the obstacle course video. It's been a sore point for over a decade.
Just imagining some Al Qaeda lawyer filing an ADA lawsuit against the obstacle course for not having a ramp. We gotta melt down the monkey bars because not all of our terrorists are able to access them.
McCarthy, finish up this missile nonsense. We'll end this episode then.
So the Crusader missile, as we mentioned, had congressional opposition, but because of its lobbying, Carlyle Group was able to keep the program.
Bin Laden's videos have a little circle with a video of someone doing ASL for the hearing impaired.
Oh god! Now I'm just imagining like an ASL like interpreter being on the Daniel Pearl beheading video.
Oh my! They're also at gunpoint.
This is payback for BDM.
Muhammad Atta hijacks the flight, and there's like an ASL interpreter there, so that everyone can understand what is going on. I wouldn't want to be ableist right now. Oh god. Well, we're gonna get some angry tweets.
Yeah.
Send them to Andy Palmer. So yes,
we'll fire Sean again for this.
The Crusader missile. As we mentioned, there was Cynthia McKinney and other Congress people were opposed to this because it had been trashed by a congressional panel in '98. It comes back after 9/11, but Carlyle's lobbying is able to keep it going until they take the company they had bought, United Defense, public in 2001. So they, of course, do this IPO where everybody thinks the Crusader missile is part of United Defense's upcoming, profits, their own little insider trading. And then they, of course, mostly exit their stake after the IPO, as a lot of private equity firms do.
They did a pump and dump with a missile company.
And as of April 2004, they sold all their shares in United Defense. And then in late 2002, I believe, or 2003, the Pentagon cancels the Crusader missile system. And just an interesting thing, if you go to the Carlyle Group Wikipedia, you can clearly tell that somebody from Carlyle Group edited that, because they mention that in the Michael Moore documentary Fahrenheit 9/11, the Carlyle Group connection was probed, but they say, even though the Crusader missile system was one of the few defense programs canceled by the Bush administration.
Wow.
Trying to
fucking snakes.
Trying to
Yeah,
imply
right.
that this is this is just a conspiracy theory, when of course it was only canceled because of massive congressional opposition.
Right.
I've actually got some audio from when they were getting together to plan this United missile.
It's easier than you think. Every person you're on the phone with, they want to get rich, and they want to get rich quickly. They all want something for nothing.
There was this one time that I was selling pot to this Amish dude. You know those guys who got like the beard with like no mustache or some bullshit? Well, he says that he only wants to make furniture.
I don't understand. What the fuck are you talking about?
I'm not putting words in your mouth or nothing, but you just said that everybody
I just
wants
wanted
to get rich.
to play the selling me this pen thing.
Just say that. What the fuck are you talking about?
Yeah, like Buddhists. They don't give a shit about money. They're wrapped in sheets.
Maybe you should skip to the part you're looking for, Andy.
No, that'll ruin it. Normal people, working class, everyday people. Everyone wants to get rich. Am I crazy?
Welcome to the Wolf of Wall Street podcast.
Listen, everyone loves the Wolf of Wall Street. They'll love listening to it.
Do you guys not want to make money?
I want to make some fucking money, okay? I could sell anything. Shit, I could sell Louis to a convent full of nuns, get them so horny they'd be
There you
fucking
go.
I could sell anything.
That's the attitude. You can sell anything. Sell me this fucking pen right here. You can sell anything. Sell that.
Go ahead. Sell me that pen. Can I finish eating first? I need today.
Brad, show him how it's done. Boom. Sell me that pen. Watch. Go on.
Let me sell this fucking pen.
That's my boy right there.
This pen.
Fucking sell anything.
Why don't you do me a favor? Why don't you name down that napkin for me?
I don't have a pen.
Exactly. Supply and demand, my friend.
Oh, nice.
We're at an hour. You want to do a wrap-up, Sean?
Yeah. So to wrap up the first part of this...
Plus like 10 minutes of sell me this pen.
I want the rest of Wolf of Wall Street in.
Entirety of the other.
They're just going to get the drug scene where they're going, ugh!
Sell me this copyright lawsuit for Wolf of Wall Street clips that we played without permission. Carlyle Group, essentially...
There was really nothing left to do but to cancel this gun program. And Donald Rumsfeld did cancel the program in a very public ceremony, but not until the gun had been kept alive long enough that the company, United Defense, was able to go public.
Right. They did the IPO for United Defense.
I love the balls of doing a... I know I already said it, but I love the balls of doing a pump and dump on a missile.
Arguably, 9/11 was a pump and dump.
But Andy, who's going to stop you? You have a missile. The Carlyle Group is a private equity firm that does, the usual private equity stuff, but particularly with a focus on defense, though they have in recent years moved away from that because they sold a lot of their defense stakes with the war on terror boom. But the next episode, we'll talk a bit more about the other two founders, William E. Conway, Daniel D'Aniello. We'll also talk about the Carlyle Group's IPO in 2012 and how that was just kind of like a scheme to help make liquid the three billionaire investors' holdings of that. We might talk a bit more about David Rubenstein's charity, and we're also going to talk about a couple of rather controversial deals the Carlyle Group has been involved with, including Manorcare, HCR Manorcare, and a oil refinery in Philadelphia, where they use the usual private equity tactics. And
Sean will reveal a personal secret.
All that and verbal fillers from Sean next week on Grubstakers.
And there'll be more, offensive 9/11 jokes for 2 hours.
And with that, I'm Yogi Pollywall.
I'm Andy Palmer.
I'm Sean P. McCarthy.
Steve Jeffries.
Thanks for listening.
All right, we're gonna
wait.
God damn it, Andy.
Wait.
I hate you so much.
Wait.
Sell me this fucking pen right here. You can sell anything. Sell that.
Go ahead. Sell me that pen. Can I finish eating first? I need.
And to write down thoughts.
Sell me this pen.
I think we disproportionately stop whites too much.
I taught those kids lessons on product development and marketing, and they taught me what it was like growing up feeling targeted for your race.
I am proud to be gay. I am proud to be a Republican.
You know, I went to a tough school in Queens, and they used to beat up the little Jewish boys.
I love having the support of real billionaires.
Hello, welcome back to Grubstakers, the podcast about billionaires. Sean P. McCarthy here, joined by
Andy Palmer,
Yogi Pollywall,
Steve Jeffries.
And we're continuing our conversation about the Carlyle Group, and particularly the
For those of you who missed it, Sean is angry at a person on the internet. And it was revealed that his dad works for the Carlyle Group.
No.
Anyways, we did our last week's episode trashing the company his dad works for, but Sean felt that there was more to say. So we made it a two-part episode. We're recording them together, so we can only assume that since Sean said that, he's been called an ableist reactionary by this guy, Connor Arpwell, and has subsequently been fired from his job.
Wouldn't it be great? So, yeah, we're recording these together, but wouldn't it be great if in the intervening week I have been doxxed and fired?
Yeah.
So while you're listening to this, I am a lot more angry than I am on this recording.
I'd like to believe that you got doxxed and then fired, then found a new job, and then this one comes out and you get doxxed and fired.
But, it's nothing to do with any sort of vindictive streak that I might have or any sort of petty personality traits. This is about the big movers and shakers in the American economy, and that's what this podcast is about educating people about billionaires. Because, again, especially with the Carlyle Group, there's...
And a guy who telegraphs virtue by calling people ableist reactionaries.
There's so much...
Who has a dad who works for the Carlyle Group.
And sells buttons.
And sells DSA-themed buttons for his own profit.
I don't even care about the DSA part. I just don't like that he sells buttons.
Yeah.
Nobody uses that. Fuck off.
But
it's a pretty lame hustle.
But so this episode will focus a little more on David Rubenstein, William Conway Jr., Daniel D'Aniello, which are, again, the 3 billionaire co-founders of the Carlyle Group.
Sean hates this guy online so much that he's decided to get anti-Semitic and anti-Italian in one episode.
3 billionaire co-founders of the Carlyle Group. Forbes has each of them at a net worth of about $3 billion as of July 2018. And so we'll talk a little bit more about their defense stuff and the lobbying work George H.W. Bush has done for them. But what I want to talk about this episode is their initial public offering of the Carlyle Group in 2012 and how that was just kind of a money-making scam for them. And also 2 American companies one called Philadelphia Energy Solutions and one called HCR Manorcare. And so kind of like what we've run through on these private equity episodes is that private equity has destroyed a lot of unions in this country, destroyed a lot of pensions, destroyed a lot of healthcare benefits, and we can only cover some of that because.
But how do they do it, Sean? How do they commit these crimes and get away with it time and time again?
Well, we'll get to that. But partly it is, of course, the carried interest loophole and the preferential tax treatment they get that makes it so profitable, and the fact that they're able to, essentially book a profit, even as we'll discuss in the case of HCR Manorcare, which would eventually go to bankruptcy. They had their profit locked in because of the management fees. But before we get to there, just one petty thing. So there's a story in 2007 where there was brief movement in Congress to repeal the carried interest loophole. David Rubenstein was a big lobbyist to stop this from happening. And a managing director at Carlyle, not the one in question of this episode, but a different managing director at Carlyle named Bruce Rosenblum, he testified to Congress, and he just said this in opposition to eliminating the carried interest loophole. He said, quote, "Is creating the next Google more important than an investment to strengthen iconic American brands such as Dunkin' Donuts and Burger King?" And when you think of Dunkin' Donuts and Burger King, you think of good American jobs with benefits and decent pay and, just really what we want to be building more of in this country. Well, David Rubenstein pays himself, $700 million or whatever it was last year.
I like how on one hand you have people arguing for creating the next Google, and on the other hand you have people, their only 2 options are create the next Google or keep Burger King and Dunkin' Donuts going. And those are the 2 business options for America going forward.
I mean, an information database that harnesses all my information and makes my life worse in the long run, or greasy food or
that also makes your life worse in the long run.
Oh, you're getting Burger King ads later, my friend.
But so Carlyle Group did its IPO, its public offering, in 2012, and as of today, the firm has approximately $195 billion in assets under management. Again, one of the biggest, if not the biggest, private equity firms in the world. But another thing I want to just touch on briefly is pension funds. And I think we've kind of talked about this a little bit on some of the other private equity hedge fund episodes. But pension funds are one of the
most unnecessary expenses a company can have, and any way to get rid of them is welcome for the American people.
Pension funds, and I'm pulling the statistic off the top of my head, so it might be completely wrong, but I believe they control about $3 trillion in capital in the U.S. through the pension system, but it is a significant amount. It is multiple trillions of capital. And so an interesting strategy that private equity and hedge funds have come up with, and David Sirota, the journalist, talks about this a fair bit, is that they essentially lobby government officials, like they were doing this in New Jersey. David Sirota wrote a story on this. They gave campaign contributions to, New Jersey Republican Party, Chris Christie, and, the manager of the New Jersey Pension Fund. And in exchange, the New Jersey Pension Fund started investing in private equity and hedge funds, and then started paying way more money in fees because, as we mentioned, private equity and hedge funds usually do this 2 and 20, where they charge 2% fee for all assets under management, 20% of the profits above a certain level, and they usually don't even beat the S&P 500. So it is like...
What, really?
Yeah, most private equity and most hedge funds do not beat the S&P 500 after fees.
So what you're saying is that the Gambino family was probably actually better for the workers.
There is, if you listen to the podcast Crime Town, it's about the mafia in Rhode Island, and they have this great quote from some guy there being like, well, at least when the mafia ran Rhode Island, they actually put some money back in the community, whereas now Wall Street and the financials just take all the money out of it. And it is I watched this John Gotti documentary a few weeks ago, and when Gotti was
That was just the movie Gotti.
Yeah. He looked a lot like John Travolta, but when Gotti was arrested, when Gotti was convicted, there were 1,000+ people protesting in New York and flipping over cars and shit.
Right.
And when Gotti was first acquitted, in what is
Teflon Don.
Right. When Gotti was first acquitted, in his Brooklyn neighborhood, there were lots of cheering people and
he played himself up as a local Robin Hood.
Right. And so it's obviously the mafia is, rent seeking and extracting, but it is an interesting contrast, whereas the mafia was at least smart enough to put some of their stolen money back into the community, whereas, Wall Street and private equity and stuff, they extract money and then they just put it into their own birthday parties.
Well, what's fascinating is that, there's been the decline of the mob since probably the early 90s, about when Gotti fell. But a lot of these schemes that you run into with private equity and stuff are basically mob schemes, but through a legitimate company and with some loophole that they were able to lobby for.
Right.
Skimming off of pensions is a classic mob scheme, but now they're able to do it through their government connections.
It's like how Napster was illegal, but Spotify's the same thing, but it's legal.
Yeah.
I think Tony Soprano's problem was he didn't hire enough lobbyists. But so, yes, we mentioned the pension funds, and then from the New Yorker...
Also, he couldn't stop beating up his connection in the assembly because he fucked his old former Gama.
Spoiler alerts, man. Come on. Not all of us have seen it.
The key lesson of David Rubenstein is don't beat up politicians who cuck you, which is why he still has a good working relationship with Barack Obama.
For now.
But so
he could have kept his marriage if he just kept his belt in his pants and didn't use it to beat the hell out of.
But so just to get to back to the pension funds real quick, according to the New Yorker, in 2009, Carlyle's profile included a $1.5 billion investment from the New York State Pension Fund. And then Andrew Cuomo, current governor, was the state attorney general that year, and he did an investigation and found that the money had been obtained in part through improper payments to middlemen by the Carlyle affiliate. So again, all of these private equity and hedge funds, they certainly do lobbying, but sometimes they do outright bribery to get public pension funds to invest with them. And the irony is, of course, private equity destroys pension funds for other workers, and in many cases, in almost every case, returns less money to the actual pension fund. So it's just kind of a ridiculous thing. But Carlyle...
it's the beginning of a strong career of Andrew Cuomo's in squashing corruption wherever it rears its ugly head.
But
there will be no more mismanagement of funds under a Cuomo administration.
He shut down the Moreland Commission because he realized someone else was going to use their brandished reputation as an anti-corruption enforcer to run for governor. He had to cut that shit out early. But Carlyle, they did not admit wrongdoing, but they paid a $20 million fine in that particular case. But so I guess we should just talk a little bit more about David Rubenstein, then we'll get to the other two founders. David Rubenstein just like random facts about him that I found. Apparently in 2007, he bought one of just 17 surviving 13th century copies of the Magna Carta.
Right.
That's from Forbes. He bought it for $24.5 million from Ross Perot.
Oh, really?
Yes.
I didn't know Perot had it before him.
Perot had to stand up on a stepladder to complete the sale. But yeah, so he bought, he's like a history buff. He makes like David Rubenstein. He's like a history buff. He makes a lot of like charitable investments. Apparently he spent like half of the costs of rehabilitating the Washington Monument was just David Rubenstein's little philanthropy thing. And he says this in a couple speeches. I don't know if he's joking, but apparently he toured.
Is washing the Washington Monument? Is that
Euphemism?
just a euphemism for jerking it?
It is now.
He toured the Washington Monument with like a congressional panel or something, and he says in speeches that when they weren't looking, he wrote his name in pen near the top of it.
Oh my God, really?
Which, again, I don't know if he's joking, but I wouldn't put it past him.
When he talks about buying the Magna Carta and a few other those documents, one of the sources I saw, he's talking about it, and he basically says it's like, you can look up those articles on those documents online, and you might look at them and then move on, but when you see it in person, it really makes you think, and it's like, buddy, you get the same. You can see it online and think. Those aren't mutually exclusive things.
I think when you see it in person, you think, wow, I'm really rich. I own this, and only I can look at it if I want.
I like the idea of David Rubenstein looking at the Magna Carta and being like, wow, all these limits on the king's power do not apply to me.
Yeah, it's just like, how do I reverse this?
What's this charter of the forest bullshit?
But yeah, so in addition to the Magna Carta, he also...
Am I one of the barons?
Okay, now how do I find loopholes in this where I can profit?
Yeah.
I own the document, but I don't own
Oh,
the
there
rule.
he is. Carried interest.
But so he also bought one of the signed copies signed by Abraham Lincoln of the Emancipation Proclamation, which in fact he loaned to Barack Obama.
And how do I reverse this one too?
Like it's forbidden reading for Burger King employees. Nobody who works at Dunkin' Donuts can read the Emancipation Proclamation because they might get ideas about how America is supposed to function.
Reading's a privilege here at Dunkin', so you got to earn it.
You want to go read? You go work at Google.
But so, yes, he also loaned his copy of the Emancipation Proclamation to Barack Obama during the Obama presidency, and Obama displayed it in the Oval Office for a time. So again, he's
That's pretty cool.
Right. Well, he's maintained his relationships on both sides of the aisle. As we mentioned, George Bush Sr. is
I'm glad that a famous historical American document has to be loaned to the president for him to display it in his office. How the first historically black American president has to
ask a white dude,
ask a rich white guy if he can display the Emancipation Proclamation in the White House.
Abraham Lincoln, while he was writing and signing it, he was like, someday this will be sold to the man who bought it using money he got by planning the 9/11 attacks. Just the way I'm intending it.
I was like, what the fuck are you talking about?
What's 9/11? What's a plane?
Oh, you'll find out. And then he walks into the sunset tipping his hat. You know what? Let's just tell people he got shot.
Right.
Because this is way too weird.
Lincoln's last words before walking into the theater that night were, I have some questions about Tower 7.
It's like, what's a tower?
But so, and David Rubenstein has had just some fun quotes. He said, quote, I did not come from a wealthy or college-educated family, but I had the good luck to have two parents who provided me the most important ingredient for a successful life. Unconditional love and support. And later, Washington lobbying contracts with Saudi Arabia.
He talks about his family not being like wealthy or college educated, but it really feels more like he's being like, those losers, they raised me, but fuck them. Like it seems less Like he's like, working class, and more like those two people were bums. They could never afford the Magna Carta.
I also like how self-congratulatory it always is when someone talks about like how great their parents raised them and how that allowed them to have more stuff than other people.
Right.
I mean, they worked hard, but I'm fucking running shit.
Yeah. Thanks to their love.
Yeah, I like the idea.
I got a bunch of things.
Like, the 7 billion people on the planet who are not billionaires, they did not have unconditional love and support from their parents.
Their parents didn't love them.
And another thing David Rubenstein has said is that he was once offered the opportunity to meet Mark Zuckerberg before he dropped out of Harvard, but decided against it. He says this is his single greatest investment regret. And I like the idea of David Rubenstein getting a phone call telling him to cancel his meeting with Mark Zuckerberg.
I like the notion that Mark after that was like, I just want more friends.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, do you really regret not meeting Mark Zuckerberg?
yeah, right?
It sounds like a terrible afternoon.
I was
that sounds like a dude that wants to fuck Mark Zuckerberg.
He missed out on a chance of Mark Zuckerberg telling him how Holocaust denial comes from a good place. And Stephen, you'll love this one. Rubenstein, so he's received a lot of criticism regarding the carried interest loophole, which we've mentioned a fair bit, but Rubenstein led the fight to prevent it from being repealed in 2008, and then, of course, Trump has basically solidified the carried interest loophole where these people in finance and private equity hedge funds are paying about half the tax rate as everybody else pays. But so Rubenstein tells Charlie Rose in 2012, quote, "Our bigger problem isn't carried interest. Our bigger problem is the $1 trillion annual deficit and the $16 trillion of debt we have."
Wow.
That's right.
And
didn't he? I don't know if you're going to get to this, but the American Enterprise Institute, was it Rubin who made a donation?
It was the other Danielle D'Aniello made a $20 million donation to the American Enterprise Institute, of course, the conservative think tank, and in exchange he got a building named after him, where I guess the factual feminist videos will be recorded now or something from Based Mom, Christina Hoff Sommers. But anyways, I guess
have no idea what any of that meant.
Christina Hoff Sommers is like one of those anti-feminist women you see online, and she was very popular in Gamergate, where she was like, these aren't attacks on female journalists. People are just sick of SJWs putting their politics in video games. So a lot of the 4chan people called her Based Mom, and it's just kind of funny where, like, a subversive web culture pushes up and promotes this woman paid by dark money to launder the evils of billionaires and say global warming isn't happening.
Based.
But so Rubenstein has also he has a Gulfstream private jet, a G550, which I don't know if it's better than a G6 or not.
We should start learning, like, since we're researching billionaires, we need to learn what all the Gulfstreams are, so we can compare them based on their Gulfstreams.
Yeah, I'm into it.
But according to this Forbes article, Rubenstein has a busy lifestyle, and he travels on his private Gulfstream 250 days a year.
What's the number again?
A Gulfstream G550.
Okay.
250 days a year?
Yes.
Where's he going?
He's going to the polar bears to laugh at them.
You don't own the Magna Carta.
Well, those are okay sized.
It's hard to swim all that distance, isn't it, Mr. Polar Bear? Huh?
You can stand up in these. Ken Langone had a story about his first private jet and how his dad had to duck down, and he asked his dad, "What do you think of this private jet?" And he says, "I like the ones where you can stand up." And then, like, the button to that story is like, "I have a much bigger private jet now."
What charming people. But so in that same Forbes article, Rubenstein just gives a revealing quote. He says, quote, "I am on 30-some nonprofit boards, which I love and to which I give a lot of money, but the networking is helpful to my firm. I can help build the firm because of the contacts I make."
Right.
So it is interesting just how billionaires launder their philanthropy.
If you're on that much corporate welfare, you should be severely restricted in what you can buy when you're on, with those welfare checks.
Just a side note, I'm having trouble differentiating between the Gulfstream G500 in the images and the Gulfstream G550 because I thought it would be pretty different, like the TI-83 graphing calculator versus the TI-89.
Obviously.
But maybe it's just because I don't fly these things. I can't differentiate.
Well, once you get your pilot's license, you'll be able to figure out the differences.
Yeah.
One thing that David also said is that like he doesn't golf or doesn't drink, so he doesn't spend time at bars, so he's got enough time to be a part of these philanthropic group. And it's like, buddy, you could golf and drink, and you would still have time to do this. You can't pretend that golfing and drinking would take up that much time out of your life.
I mean, he is paid several $100 million a year to do basically nothing. To fly around the world and do his little Bloomberg talk show and promote his philanthropy. And, like, you know, as we mentioned, he's a chairman of the Smithsonian Institute, a chairman of the Kennedy Center for Performing Arts. And, you know, he's really kind of, I guess he also gave like $1 million to the National Zoo in 2011 to promote panda procreation.
What? Really?
Yeah, just that kind of shit.
I like that a priority for him was making sure pandas fuck.
Well, he has said, quote, He says he finds an analogy between private equity and sex, saying, quote, you realize there were certain things you shouldn't do, but the urge is there and you can't resist.
Wow.
So no wonder the pandas are having so much problems breeding if they are taking the David Rubenstein School of How to Have Sex, which involves...
I'd say in terms of David Rubenstein, it's probably like, you know, private equity is just like sex. I have a court date for both because of both.
Private equity is...
Cut that out, Yogi. Got it?
No, don't. Private equity is just...
Enhance it.
Private equity is just like sex. It gets easier when they don't have pensions or health care benefits.
We're meant to talk about what he's a board member of. This is a list of it. It's the Kennedy Center, the Smithsonian Institution, Council on Foreign Relations, Harvard Corporation, National Gallery of Art, University of Chicago.
Just play someone from the documentary who does the same list.
Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, Johns Hopkins Medicine, Lincoln Center for the Performing Arts, Institute for Advanced Study, Duke University. And two of these that I found very interesting was the Institute for Advanced Study, because essentially it's like, hey, you're smart. We're going to put you in a place and you guys can hang out and learn and figure out some shit.
Wait, who's in the Institute of Advanced Study?
He's a board member of that group. Who's in this?
Because that was like the thing that Einstein created, the Princeton Institute of Advanced Study.
I'm sure he's there because of merit. I like the idea of like a guy who's only worth like $100 million who has to go to the Institute for Intermediate Study. But so Rubenstein. What if like it came out that like Rubenstein like funded?
It was started by Werner von Braun.
Rubenstein like gave several million to Popular Mechanics magazine to debunk 9/11 trutherism. Like, no, it can melt steel beams. Come on, stop asking questions. But so David Rubenstein was picketed by the Working Families Party of New York because of the carried interest loophole. And I guess he was giving some sort of speech of like the civil disobedience efforts of like Gandhi and Martin Luther King, and these protesters interrupted him. And he said at the time, quote, when history is written and people talk about the great protests, I don't think that this will be in this category. So yes, when people talk about the great protests, they will not remember when they asked him to pay a little bit more in taxes.
One thing I want to mention about the board members is the Council of Foreign Relations. It's a public policy think tank. If you look on the Wikipedia, there's a controversy part, and there's a few links that are now disappeared for some reason. I don't know. Whatever the bibliography was, you can't find anymore. There's an oops, something went wrong link that shows up, which is another example of how corporations that have billions of dollars can clean the internet of their filth.
And so just one other thing before we move on from the Rubenstein quotes. So
one other thing before Sean does is one other thing. It looks like the Gulfstream 550 was their newest top-level jet, but it is now being replaced in terms of top-level jets by the Gulfstream 500 and the Gulfstream 600, which are being introduced this year. So if Rubenstein wants to stay hot with the billionaires, he is going to have to trade up.
To a better private jet.
To a better private jet.
Hmm.
You know, It looks like G500 is $43.5 million. G600 is $54.5 million. So if you want, $57.9 million. That was 2014.
Refresh check Craigslist.
Yeah.
We do eBay.
So one last thing on the David Rubenstein quote before we move on is on June 8th, this is according to New Yorker, Rubenstein was giving...
Sell me this pen.
There we go.
On June 8th, I believe of 2007, Rubenstein was giving an address to the supporters of the Economics Club at the Phillips Collection, and his cell phone rang, and he left the stage. I like the idea of somebody saying, the operation is canceled, and hanging up. But according to the New Yorker, his cell phone rang, and he left the stage. And so in 2007, this was in the middle of like the last time the Senate tried to close the carried interest loophole. It passed the House. Or I think 2008, excuse me. It passed the House, but then it got stuck in the Senate. And so in June 8th of that year, Rubenstein gets this cell phone call. He leaves the stage, and then he comes back on the stage. He returns and says, quote, "That was a senator. That one call just saved us on carried interest." Wow. And he denies saying this. But basically, the carried interest loophole got to like 57 or 58 senators, but they could never get to the filibuster-proof 60. And, of course, they would never want to remove the filibuster to end carried interest loophole.
To end a system where about 30% of the population and select states can stop anything from advancing for the rest of the country.
But so I guess we can move on to a couple just interesting investments that the Carlyle Group has. Well, I guess we should first talk about the IPO that the Carlyle Group did in 2012. So David Rubenstein himself said that the reason they did this initial public offering in 2012 was he wanted to liquefy his holdings or make his holdings more liquid because, as we mentioned, he has about a $3 billion net worth, and most of that comes because the three partners have had about a 50% stake in Carlyle Group. They've since sold some of it, but they still have significant stakes. And then, of course, managing directors also have equity stakes in the firm. But David Rubenstein wants to do this IPO to liquefy his holdings, and the Carlyle Group IPO is very interesting, and I just get this New York Times quote here. The New York Times wrote in 2012 that it is quite possible that the Carlyle Group, the private equity firm that is preparing to go public, is proposing the most shareholder-unfriendly corporate governance structure in modern history. So basically, as per the shareholder rules and such, Carlyle shareholders have no ability to elect the directors. They have no ability. There's going to be no oversight of compensation. That's all going to be set in-house. Carlyle, according to the New York Times, Carlyle does not even intend to hold annual meetings of stockholders. Given that the shareholders have no voting rights, why bother?
Oh, wow. Really?
Yeah. But which I guess...
Wait, that's the only reason they have those meetings is because they have voting power usually?
It's a place... public companies, it's a place for shareholders to express concerns about things that the company has done.
Right.
And it is actually, I think, kind of wise that they are not having these meetings because for the podcast, I would have bought one share and gone there and asked about what happened at Tower 7.
They would have been like, which Tower 7?
But so it's just interesting and a lot of other private equity firms, including the Blackstone Group.
But they're like, oh, you got one share. We have to tell them.
The Blackstone Group, Apollo Global Management, among others, have similar things. And then the one thing that Carlyle tried to do that was too far is they wanted to force all shareholder class action lawsuits into arbitration. And if you're not familiar with arbitration, it's basically like, okay, you sign this contract and you can no longer go to the courts. We'll just resolve everything in-house, which surprisingly enough tends to favor the company more often than the court system does. But so there was actually a lot of pushback against that and a lot of allegations that it might be illegal, but the Supreme Court has actually upheld some of these ridiculous arbitration clauses in the past, but they eventually backed off of this arbitration clause. However, if you own shares in the Carlyle Company, you have no input into the direction. You are just helping David Rubenstein fucking liquefy his money so he can buy more Magna Cartas.
What you're saying is it's potentially a large pump and dump company?
I don't think I'm saying that. What I'm really saying...
You can remember.
Sell me
this pen.
Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that's what I'm saying. And just like another thing about the IPO from Business Insider kind of goes through private equity and why IPOs are kind of ridiculous for them. Again, the Blackstone Group has done an IPO as well. It's essentially a way for them to cash out. But the 3 ways to get economic exposure to a private equity fund is to be an investor in the fund, number 1, or 2, be a manager of one of the funds, in which case you're essentially, if you're in the category number 2, a manager of one of the funds, you are guaranteed profits because you get these, as we mentioned, management fees, 2 and 20s and all that. And, even if a company you take over goes bankrupt, you've already locked in profit, so you're totally fine. Or the option number 3 is to buy publicly traded equity. And the thing is, when you're buying publicly traded equity in one of these companies, you are essentially last in line to get any profit. So it is kind of a ridiculous deal.
It's like a bread line of bullshit.
Right. According to Business Insiders, there are incredibly effective mechanisms set up to capture as much of the value for the managers before it gets to you. So this IPO was essentially a way for David Rubenstein to launder his money, and he's been very successful at it. And he's also kind of laundered his reputation as a philanthropist who, interviews Bush and Clinton and, donates all this money to the arts and this kind of shit and scrawls his name on the Washington Monument.
It's crazy because, when you look at the philanthropy with the bigger picture of everything he's done, it seems less like, I want to help the world, and more like, oh, I caused a lot of pain. I probably should give back.
Wait, so Sean, you said he laundered his image as a philanthropist? Like he had a dirty image as a philanthropist? And then he ran it through some legitimate companies? And now he's gotten above the board reputation as a philanthropist.
Yeah, that's what he's saying, Andy. You got a problem with that?
So
I guess not.
I want to talk about 2 companies that the Carlyle Group has been involved with. And again, if you haven't listened to our previous episode, well, that's kind of important for this one, but that kind of talks about their
9/11 Incorporated.
That talks about some of their initial investments in the defense industry. But another thing they did, as we mentioned, George Bush Sr. came on board. George Bush Sr. came on board the Carlyle Group in 1998, and since then they've been very secretive about saying how much they are actually paying him to do things. But one of the things he did was lobby for them in South Korea, and the documentary Iron Triangle makes the argument that George Bush Sr. helped get them some contacts in South Korea, and then with their influence just in terms of general lobbying, the Asian financial crisis happened in, I believe, 97, 98. And the South Korea had to be bailed out by the IMF, the International Monetary Fund. And as a condition for this IMF bailout, they made South Korea change its laws so that banks, Korean banks, could be majority foreign ownership.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And so
after he left the presidency, he was working for Carlyle and made several swings through East Asia, going to Thailand,
buckle up, guys.
Going to South Korea and other places, sort of looking for investment opportunities for Carlyle. And Carlyle finally settled on South Korea. And then the way that overlaps with policy is during the Asia crisis, the International Monetary Fund came in with this rescue package for South Korea that the United States backed. And the U.S. used the IMF crisis to push through deregulation and changes in rules around foreign ownership, the changes that they'd been unable to press through, maybe 25 or 30 years of trade policy.
Okay, so I'll say that unlike last episode where the clips explained it better than Sean, I think this time Sean explained it way better than the clip.
Yeah, I think you did good. Nice job, Sean.
The clips don't have enough ableist slurs, and that's what I add to the analysis. But yeah, so Carlyle would invest about $1 billion in Core Am Bank, Korean American Bank. I'm not sure exactly, but it is interesting where their connection from paying George H.W. Bush allowed them to set up shop in Korea, and then allowed them to lobby to get the IMF to impose conditions on suffering South Koreans in the financial crisis that would be greatly financially beneficial to them. And also George W. Bush, Carlyle put him on the board of Cater Air in 1990.
Cater Air?
Yeah.
Is it Qatar Air?
Qatar Air. C-A-T-E-R Air.
C-A-T-E-R?
Yeah, it was a Texas-based... Oh, yeah, so it was a Texas-based company.
It was a really well-catered airline.
It was a Cater Air. It was a Texas-based company that provided in-flight meals for passengers.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
It provided...
so it really is right there.
Yeah, right, right.
It provided last meals for the people George W. Bush would go on to execute. Bush was able to insider trade on his knowledge as to what the menu options would be for the people he would be putting to death.
The people in that airplane were paid crisis actors, and they weren't very good crisis actors, so they put them in the one where they get killed.
There's two American companies that I particularly want to talk about with regard to the Carlyle Group, and the first is called Philadelphia Energy Solutions. So Philadelphia Energy Solutions...
they're able to harness the power of rioting.
It was a joint venture between, this according to Reuters, a joint venture between the Carlyle Group and Energy Transfer Partners. And basically they took over a 335,000 oil barrel per day refinery on the south side of Philadelphia. But then they forced employees to contribute more to their health plan and suspended pension contributions in, I believe, September 2016, I believe. So they suspend pension contributions. They make employees contribute more to their health care, essentially cutting benefits. And this is all, well, as we know, the way private equity works, paying themselves hundreds of millions of dollars in management fees, racking up debt for the corporate entity, these kinds of things, these kind of ridiculous tactics. And so the United Steelworkers, which was the union who represented the employees there, on June 30, 2017, they threatened to strike. They say that these benefit cuts are ridiculous. We will strike. And lo and behold, January 2018, Philadelphia Energy Solutions files for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. And we've kind of talked a bit about this in the Paul Singer episode, the Steve Schwartzman episode, but bankruptcy courts are a way that private equity, among others, are able to wipe out unions, wipe out pensions, wipe out health care. And so it is just a pretty clear direct relationship where a union is saying, no, you are not going to cut our benefits and make us pay for your fucking Gulfstream or whatever the fuck. And they're like, okay, we'll just take you to bankruptcy court and we will wipe you out, and we already have a profit locked in. So when we talk about the Carlyle Group, they do a lot of evil stuff in terms of war profiteering and military-industrial complex, but they also do the more general evil stuff on the domestic side of private equity. And that Philadelphia Energy Solutions is a good example of that.
Wow, what fucking scum.
Yeah. But, you got to buy a $700,000 condo in Washington, D.C. somehow. And I
mean, it's just finance. It's nothing personal.
Yeah. That is, quote, finance. And the other company that I wanted to talk about for a bit here is...
I mean, destroying pension funds is a recognized disability. And... I think trying to frame it as a bad thing shows your deep reactionary sentiments.
You know, if you're opposed to the destruction of disability benefits, you're ableist. Really, the ableist thing is implying that people can't survive without disability benefits.
Wow.
Are you saying that disabled people would require disability benefits? But yeah, so... it is just like the way the private equity industry works, and we've hit this point a lot, but we hope people understand when they hear the words private equity, you might as well be saying, vulture, blood-sucking vampire who has destroyed the middle class in America and helped us get to a situation where about 6.5% of private sector workers have a union, down from 33% But so the other big kind of company we looked at with Carlyle is called HCR Manorcare. HCR Manorcare.
I think
Could
they
you
got
bear
it.
another 3 minutes with that?
HCR Manorcare.
No, let's go through this.
We pronounce every individual syllable.
Manorcare.
Remember when we thought we'd do a 3-parter on this? So HCR Manorcare was another Carlyle.
I'll take the man.
It was a Carlyle investment property, and the Service Employees International Union, SEIU, one of the biggest unions in the United States, protested in 2007 and 2008 because they knew the Carlyle Group was coming in, and they know essentially what private equity does. So Carlyle Group comes in to HCR Manorcare in 2007, 2008. David Rubenstein, he speaks to a conference about these pickets, and he says, quote,
he personally fires the first rubber bullets. The troops love him because he puts himself up at the front line.
Front line, yeah.
It's pay to play.
David Rubenstein appears before the protesters and tears up an original copy of the Magna Carta in front of them and says, "You have no protections." If they let me do this to a priceless document guaranteeing the rights of nobility, what do you think they'll allow me to do to you?
And then This Is America plays on loudspeakers.
David Rubenstein says, quote, the SEIU is not happy that 60,000 workers at the company aren't unionized. SEIU had like a small union presence there, but the company wasn't majority union workers. He says they're campaigning and saying the health care will not be adequate. That isn't true in my view. It's really an effort to increase unionization and not so much to worry about patients' health care. And so, of course, private equity and David Rubenstein and the Carlyle Group come in, and they thwart off the union. And the way that they decide to increase healthcare access or whatever bullshit, the way they decide to increase patients' health care is by fraudulently overbilling Medicare at least 1,200 times and providing treatments that various patients didn't need and that were in many cases dangerous for their health. And they were, in fact, sued by the Department of Justice in 2015 for this. And so
faced steep consequences.
All right. So according to the Department of Justice, the federal officials said that they found more than 1,200 false claims filed by HCR between October 2006 and May 2012. During that time, the government said Medicare issued more than $6 billion in payments to Manorcare, much of which was fraudulent. And so basically, again, from this DOJ complaint,
this seems like a conundrum that would be like raised by some god figure in a 50s movie, like man or care. You must choose.
Well, I love men, but I need the care. Oh God, I guess I'll go with
Do
care.
not pause, mortal.
I choose care. I choose care.
It is done.
Manorcare set up the triage facilities at Ground Zero. In a completely unrelated coincidence. They just happened to be ready to go at the time. And again, we were talking about kind of the mafia. This is literally, if you watch the pilot of The Sopranos, this is the Medicare fraud scheme they come up with, where they get a guy who owes them money to bill Medicare for services never provided or for unnecessary services. Right. So this is like David Rubenstein's private equity innovation magic, is to come in and just cook the books at a company and make it completely fraudulent. And so again, just from this DOJ complaint, HCR Manorcare's corporate offices developed a scheme to provide excess care in order to qualify for the, quote, ultra-high rate Medicare pays to particularly needy patients. The company then pressured rehab therapists and facility administration to reach unreasonable reimbursement metrics, which led to patients being subject to needless and potentially harmful treatments. And then the suit also claimed that patients were kept in skilled nursing facilities longer than was medically required, and that HCR threatened to terminate employees who did not administer and bill for unnecessary treatments. And again, this is just textbook fraud and the kind of thing that you might expect to be avoided if you had an actual union at the company.
Right, right.
So, of course, David Rubenstein's bullshit about how they don't care about health care. They just want to increase union roles. Well, it looks like you don't really care about health care either, you fucking scum-sucking asshole.
And you too, Connor and DC. Fuck you and your buttons. Your stupid face.
What if every employee laid off by Carlyle Group gets a free DSA button? They get half off. Connor's buttons.
That's how they identify who was fired and who's at the company still.
But so HCR Manorcare, partly because of...
I just have to say that these schemes being carried out by massive international conglomerates instead of local mafia, like...
It's over for the little guy.
That scene in The Sopranos where they're trying to, like, squeeze Starbucks.
Fake Starbucks.
Fake Starbucks shop, and, like, they just can't because corporate...
checks the books every night.
Yeah.
But yeah, so partly because of this, HCR Manorcare had to file Chapter 11 bankruptcy. But as part of their bankruptcy, they paid their fucking CEO $116 million.
What?
And even though because of the bankruptcy, Carlyle was supposed to get wiped out, according to the New York Post, Carlyle was still able to bank a profit on this deal because of the way private equity is structured. Yeah, so according to New York Post, it will...
How is private equity structured?
It will escape the investment with a profit thanks to a dividend in the wake of the real estate sale leaseback deal. And so we've kind of mentioned like some of these dividends, but like a lot of the management fees are built in to pay out to the private equity owner as soon as any part of the company is sold off. But yes, so
putting this in dumb guy language. If you're Carlyle, you buy the company, and then you charge it management fees, basically draining it, and then get rid of it?
Yeah, I mean, it's so there's a few different ways of doing it, but like, yes, primarily the way private equity operates is cutting costs. So they go in and suddenly they can bill this company management fees now that they control it, and they can also run up debt on its books. So particularly if they raised leverage to buy the company, they just transfer that debt over to their books. And then there's a few different ways. Usually they just try to cut costs, particularly wages and benefits are the big way to cut costs.
Right.
And then they either sell it out, or if it's sell it off, or if it's a private company, they take it public and sell it off that way. But also, essentially, bankruptcy court is another tool in their arsenal because if, say, there's a union that resists their plans to cut benefits at their oil refinery, they can drag it through bankruptcy court and destroy them that way. But it's the fact that they have, these debts transferred off their books and the management fees locked in that they kind of guarantee a profit before they've even done anything. So it's like if they succeed, great. If they don't, they're still fine. But
and
yes.
It's usually built to destroy the companies.
I mean,
it seems.
Right. Well, like there's cases where they have like some sort of turnaround, again, like Dunkin' Donuts, or they were involved in like Hertz, but these aren't like good jobs for Americans or whatever other benefit you want to say. It's financial engineering, and it's subsidized by the carried interest loophole and the capital gains tax rate. And it's just really been part of the reason that hollowed out the middle class and created all those Trump voters. But we should talk, before we run out of time, about the other two co-founders. We focused pretty primarily on David Rubenstein because he is the public face. He gives fucking TEDx talks where he talks about you don't need money to be a philanthropist. What? Which is like, well, you know what? I will give him credit for being perfectly appropriate for a TED Talk.
Yeah, right,
because that is the kind of meaningless bullshit that they love there.
What I've learned about giving away money is that you don't need money to give away money.
I've learned you don't need to bust to actually have sex. You can just dry hump for a bit. But yes.
I mean, that one's true.
Oh, ableist much?
Yeah. Ableist against the people who don't bust during sex.
Don't knock dry humping, Sean. I mean,
you guys, you switched David to Connor for like 20 minutes. And you didn't even know it.
But so the other two, so David Rubenstein, as we mentioned, public face. He goes on TV a lot. He goes on he went on Charlie Rose before Charlie Rose got caught doing the bad thing. But the other two founders of the co-founders of the Carlyle Group, in addition to Steve Norris, who sold off his stake in '95, but the other two billionaires are a little more secretive. There's not as much information about them online, but
which is a tragedy.
Yes. But it is just something where it's like, if you're going to like profit off war, profiteering, maybe it's smarter to keep a low profile. I don't particularly know. You'll have
talk was like you can cause a war in Iraq without buying off politicians.
You don't have to be rich to change U.S. foreign policy and make it more aggressive to benefit your own investment portfolio.
Commit 9/11. You don't need to learn how to land.
That's his TED
You
talk.
don't need an airplane for a 9/11.
You know, 9/11 was carried out for just like 20 grand or something, right? Like, you just get a few of your friends, you go in together, you can carry out.
But with our innovation, you can 9/11 for 10 grand, 5 grand.
6 easy payments of $3,499.
The audience gives him a standing ovation.
Hi, I'm Billy Mays here with 9/11.
It pans to the audience, and they were all people who were supposedly killed on 9/11. They are really fucking with us right now. But so before we run out of time, I just want to talk a little bit about the two other co-founders and what is known about them, William Conway Jr. and Daniel D'Aniello. Starting with William Conway Jr., they're all worth about $3 billion according to Forbes. He was born in 1949 in Lowell, Massachusetts. He got an undergrad degree from Dartmouth in 1971, MBA from University of Chicago Business School.
Oh, he plays basketball.
Yeah. And he, just from his Wikipedia, I'm sorry for the lazy research, but again, there's not much out there on him. He started his career serving in a variety of positions in corporate finance, commercial lending, and general management.
Okay, so finance.
Yeah. Yes. He worked in finance.
Looks like
So
Sean was wrong.
This is just regular stuff.
Sean has to eat his hat.
His daughter is a rabid conservative who is bullied by members of the John Birch Society. It's kind of an opposite scenario. But so he worked for the First National Bank of Chicago, and then he worked in various financial positions at MCI Communications, and I believe, he was named CFO in 1984, and then he joined the Carlyle Group, coming from his CFO experience. So again, it was kind of like we mentioned, it was David Rubenstein, Steve Norris, and then they kind of got these other finance guys to go in with them because they had this idea of a private equity firm that relied on Washington lobbying and insider access capitalism, as Michael Lewis has called it. And that's kind of the basic overview of William Conway Jr. He's kept his head down. He's spent